If you've worked on a threat intel team, one of the most common questions that you get is, hey, threat intel, what can you tell me about this hash? What can you tell me about this IP address? We can potentially spend a lot of time answering those questions. Synapse gives you the ability to determine that very quickly, or if you choose to give access to Synapse to others in your organization, they can ask those types of questions and answer them themselves. So one basic example, let's say I want to know about some FQDN. Maybe I've seen this in an alert, maybe I've seen this in sandbox data, and I want to know what, if anything, do we know about this domain. I can use my query bar here in lookup mode, simply paste in or type in that domain and see if Synapse knows about it. Now I do get an object back, meaning Synapse has this domain in its data store. We've seen it before. It's colorized, so we have some context. These are the tag colors that I've configured to give me a visual cue that we know some information about this domain. So simply asking about that domain and looking at the tags that have been recorded on it, I can see that based on these tags, and if I'm not sure what this funky dotted tag notation means, I can hover over that tag and get a little pop-up that gives me the definition. But looking at these tags, I can see that this domain has been reported by ESET. They associate it with the DownDelft malware family and also with the SEDNet threat group. We've recorded internally that this domain has been sinkholed on 2 separate occasions, once by Kaspersky and once by an unknown sinkholer that we call sinkholer 14. Internally, we've associated this domain with APT28. And some of these tags also have dates associated with them. In doing analysis, time to me can be a very critical part of my analysis and of what I'm looking at. And in addition to being able to record tags, observations about an object, we can also optionally record dates that indicate when that tag was relevant. So for example, in recording that we associate internally this domain with APT28, we've added dates to indicate that we believe that they controlled this domain between October 2013 and October 2015. Similarly, we've associated dates with those sinkhole organizations to indicate when we believe those organizations sinkholed that domain. So even simply looking up an individual indicator and viewing the tags or the context associated with that, I'm able to glean a lot of information in terms of, hey, what do we know about this? Now, in some cases, when I first look up an initial indicator, we may not know as much about it. So let's say I ask about an IP address. It's in the system. We've got some colorization, so we know that there's some tags on it, but the tags themselves are pretty thin. Once again, this has been reported by ESET, but all ESET has told us is that this is malicious. There's no further context that we recorded about what ESET said. And we have a publication date for when they included this in some type of public reporting. But I can use Synapse's Explore feature to start navigating through the data and see what is connected to this IP address, what is nearby in the knowledge graph that might give us additional information. And when I explore from that IP address, I get a lot of additional data about it. I can see the associated autonomous system where the IP is registered. I have the PTR record showing the reverse lookup, but more importantly, I have some INET flow data. Ryan talked about this in her presentation. This is coming from sandbox execution data, where Synapse is telling me, okay, we may not know a whole lot about this IP in terms of what ESET said, but we have flow data from a sandbox instance that says there are at least 2 different files that communicate with that IP. So that could be benign, it might be malicious, but I can continue to potentially investigate those 2 files. They are also referenced down here, so I can potentially start exploring to see what we know about the files themselves. That IP address is also linked to an article, what we call a media news object or a media news node. So this is the ESET blog where they referenced that indicator. The IP that we navigated from is directly connected to the reporting in which it appeared. So if I want to know what other indicators ESET talked about, I can explore from that article and see that they reported an additional IP address as well as 3 hashes. If I want to learn more about the article itself, one of the properties that Synapse records about that article is the URL where it was published. So I can also go directly to that article from Synapse. I can choose to open that link in my browser, go directly to ESET's article, and then read about their context and their reporting to see how it relates to that IP address. And I'm able to do that all with a simple lookup and a little bit of navigation through the data model. We also have, well, let me show you this first. As I said, if you have a known indicator that you want to look up, we can simply paste that into lookup mode. So if I want to look up the domain vertex.link, I can do that. But what if I just want to know, okay, what do we know in general? What does Synapse know about the Vertex project? I just want to search for Vertex. If I use lookup mode by itself, I don't get any information back. Lookup mode is specifically designed to allow you to work with common indicators like domains, IP addresses, hashes, URLs, email addresses, and a few odd ones like cryptocurrency addresses. It will recognize those, as well as CVE numbers, but it doesn't recognize just a text string. We do have a text search mode that I can leverage. So if I switch over to this mode and search on Vertex, Synapse will show me any object in the system where the properties of that object contain this string Vertex. So in this case, it's pulled back a number of URLs that reference Vertex. A couple of them are our own website. One is our GitHub repository. We have some tags that we use internally that are our own internal tags. So those tags reference Vertex because they have a specific internal meaning to our company. We have an organization object that represents Vertex, the company, and so on. So this is a way for me to search broadly to see what are all of the different objects in the system that may reference the thing I'm asking about. So for maybe a slightly more practical example, let's say I'm researching the threat group Putter Panda, and I don't know what tags we use for that. I have no idea what indicators might exist for it. I just want to know what are all of the possible things that we may know about in Synapse related to this threat group. If I search on that term Putter, similarly, I get a lot of information back using that text search method or that text search mode. I have various articles that reference the term Putter. These may not all be Putter Panda. This one is Putter-ing, but it did find the string and information related to that search term. We have the URLs where some of those blogs have been posted. We have 2 attack groups. We actually can represent the MITRE attack framework within Synapse. So 2 of MITRE's group objects that represent Putter Panda were returned here. In addition, some of the MITRE software families where the description of the family indicates that they are used or potentially used by Putter Panda. Again, some of the tags that we use internally and so on. So that text search can be used to bring back a much broader variety of data if I'm not sure where to start with my research, or if I simply want to know what are all of the objects that reference this thing or indicate what we know about this thing, I can leverage text search as well. Finally, what happens if we have indicators that Synapse doesn't know about? I'm going to switch back to lookup mode. Let's say in this case, I'm investigating a suspicious email. It might be a phishing message, but I don't know. So I want to ask about some of the indicators associated with this email message to see, before I open that attachment, is this something that I should be concerned about? So what if I choose to search on the sender of the email? Again, I can paste that email address into our lookup bar to see if Synapse knows about it. In this case, it doesn't, but I get a pop-up in the corner that says, hey, I don't know about this, but if you want to create this as a node, add this to the system, you can. So that pop-up will go away after a few seconds, but if I choose to create it, I have the opportunity to review that node or multiple nodes if I've pasted multiple things into the search bar, make sure this looks correct. If for some reason it's wrong and I don't want to add it, I can simply choose to remove it. But otherwise, I can create that object in the system. Now I have an object representing that email address. Because we've just added it, we really don't have any context, there's no tags, we don't know much about it, but I could still try to explore to see if there's anything else in the system. And as it turns out, the domain associated with that sender is known to us, even though we weren't aware of the specific email address. So this domain has some context. In looking at the tags associated with it, this has been reported publicly by both Accenture and FireEye. We've got some associations with threat groups, Mudcarp, Periscope, as well as some malware families. And internally, we're already tracking this domain as being associated with a group that we refer to as P13. So we have some context here. This may be enough to make me suspicious of this email and decide that it's probably sketchy and I may want to know more about it. So let's say I have the actual email file itself. I can choose to upload that into the system. Hopefully we've got a better way to get it in than uploading it from my hard drive, but for demo purposes, we're just going to do that. So I can take that email file and upload it. I'm going to not parse it quite yet. I want to show you exactly what that does. So Synapse has uploaded the file. Once again, it's created that object for me to represent that file, and then the actual physical file itself is now also stored in the system. Synapse has created some basic properties. When I upload that file, Synapse automatically calculates the MD5, the size, the SHA-1, other hashes, and so forth, and sets those properties for me. It's also set the name property based on the name of the file on disk. But other than that, Synapse doesn't know much about it. We've just got these basic properties linked so far. But I can use the Synapse file parser power-up to parse that file and extract additional information. And what file parser does is it is able to do a number of things. It is able to recognize ASCII strings within any file that you parse. And it recognizes, once again, common indicators like domains, IP addresses, email addresses, and so on. So it can extract and link those strings. It also is able to recognize certain types of files and extract file-specific metadata. So it can recognize things like zip files and unpacked zip files. It can recognize signed binaries and extract the X509 information from those signed binaries. And it can recognize email files, among other things. So it's able to recognize and parse out some features specific to email messages. Now, when I explore from that file, I see some additional information besides just the hashes that we saw initially. We have IP addresses. And again, this is part of that ASCII strings parsing, where file parser was able to recognize this information from the email headers and extract and link these directly to the file. Same thing with some of these domains and email addresses. These have been parsed out in terms of strings and so forth in the headers, but it's also parsed out metadata, and it's created something that we call an INET email message node, which we use to record some of that basic header information. So this is metadata about that email file. And we can see some of the properties that have been extracted out and set on this object are the date of the email, the sending email address. This was our sketchy email that started our research, the recipient, the subject. It's also parsed out the message body. So if I want to see what the content of the message was, I can hover over it and get this little pop-up. If I want to view the full body a little bigger, I can open that to show the full text and see the content of that message. File parser is also recursive. So in this case, we had an email message, but if I explore from that email metadata, I can see that that message also had an attachment. So Synapse's file parser is also able to recognize not only the email message itself, but any base 64 data embedded within that message, and it's able to extract that, link it to the email message itself, and then create a separate object for that attachment. So if I pivot from this attachment node, the email message attachment node, I can see the file that represents the attachment itself. And in this case, we have pre-existing knowledge of this file. Again, we've got the colorization that reflects the tags that we've applied to this attachment. So even though we hadn't seen this particular email message or this particular sender, Synapse already knew that that FQDN from the sending email was malicious. And in parsing the email message itself and navigating through the data connections, we're able to see that this attachment has been previously seen before. And in this case, the tags tell us that this has been reported by Accenture as being associated with the Mudcarp threat group. I can continue to explore from here. I can see additional information about the attachment and go forth and so on. But again, trying to illustrate how you can take a very basic piece of information, start adding data to Synapse, leverage the existing connections and relationships within the data to provide a lot of information, build up a big picture just from that simple indicator. So that showed us a little bit of how we can navigate existing data and some simple ways that we can get one-off data into Synapse. You saw where if an indicator doesn't yet exist in the system, Synapse will easily prompt me to create that object. You saw where you can upload a file and have Synapse extract some information from the file. But typically as an analyst, I want to work with as much data as possible. So what are the different methods that we can potentially use to get data into Synapse in bulk? Now, there are a number of ways that we can do that. One of the key methods that we use that Ryan talked about is what we call our power-ups. And power-ups are a number of different components, plugins, however you want to refer to them, that provide additional functionality to Synapse. In many cases, these are designed specifically to connect to third-party data sources. You've heard us reference a number of them in the course of this talk, whether that's VirusTotal, hybrid analysis, Intezer, Alien Vault, Risk IQ. There's a number of different power-ups, and we're adding them all the time. Power-ups are not limited to those third-party data sources. For example, we have a power-up that we call SidePocket that allows you to connect to an external database system. Maybe this is an existing database within your organization, but SidePocket connects to a number of common formats, whether that's Elasticsearch, MySQL, Impala. There's a whole host of database formats and database systems that we support. We have connectors to Jira, as Ryan mentioned. We have connectors to Datadog. So if you have logging that you're doing in Datadog, we can connect and bring some of those logs into Synapse. So a lot of different ways that we can work with other systems and get that data into Synapse. But power-ups are one way we can import data in bulk. So a few power-ups that I want to show you. One is the Alien Vault power-up. If you're familiar with Alien Vault OTX, this is a public free system that can be used for people to share indicators and share reporting. As an individual, I can create a report or what's called a pulse within Alien Vault and say, hey, I did this research and here are these associated indicators. Alien Vault themselves also publishes a number of pulses that they typically derive from public reporting. So here's one example where they've taken a report from OnLab. This was the original source for the pulse. They've processed this. Alien Vault has extracted relevant indicators that they have observed in OnLab's reporting. They've referenced a number of tags and additional information in putting this pulse together. And one way that I can get bulk data into Synapse is to leverage the Alien Vault API access through our Alien Vault power-up and pull these pulses into Synapse. So how can I do that? Power-ups in Synapse will typically install, that's the wrong copy pasta, typically install commands, storm commands that allow you to work with those power-ups. And I'm having some copy pasta trouble here. So the command to sync with Alien Vault is, here we go, ta-da, alienvault.otx.pulses. I've configured my Alien Vault API key for their free service. If I run this command by itself, it will download all of the current pulses that I'm subscribed to. That's typically several thousand, and I don't want to show all of that during this demo. So I'm going to restrict this and say only download the 5 most recent, and then yield me the results so that I can see what comes back. So if I run this, Synapse will go out and pull those in. And you can see it's created what we call media news nodes to represent the pulses, articles, public reporting. We have the published date. So these were published, May and June of this year. We have some of the properties associated with the reporting, but more importantly, this is also pulled in the indicators. So if I explore from a specific pulse, a specific article, I can see the indicators that Alien Vault has reported in that pulse. These are colorized because Alien Vault includes tags. So part of pulling in the data, we have applied Alien Vault's tags to the indicators that they've reported. So I can scroll through and see the information that's been published and associated with that particular activity and so on. From here, I can choose to explore further. I can enrich this data, as Ryan mentioned, but simply by leveraging this Alien Vault power-up, I'm able to pull in public reporting. And I know that as an analyst, I definitely like to take advantage of other people's reporting and other people's work. There's so much going on out there that we can't all cover and research it all. So it's helpful to me to know what other people are reporting. And this is a quick and easy way to get some of that reporting into my system, where I can then take this data and continue to explore, enrich, make my own assessments, and so on.